Hello and welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. I'm Chuck Benoit with the Nature of Things, where we are realigning God, government, and natural law so that we might restore our American Republic. Today I'd like to talk about usurpation. Webster's 1828 dictionary defines that as the act of seizing or occupying and enjoying the property of another. When it comes to the constitutional authorities given to the three branches of government, usurpation can actually go both ways. When a branch of government either exercises the authority of another or gives it away willingly, usurpation has been committed. And I might just remind all that usurpation is an impeachable offense. An example of this happening in Congress is the thousands of rules and laws that agencies write. These rules have a full authority of law, but Congress didn't write those laws. And as we know, Congress is the only entity allowed to make law, and it wasn't given the authority to pass that responsibility on to others. President Donald J. Trump is in so much trouble with Congress and the court system because he refuses to do either. He will not willingly give up his executive powers, nor is he going to sit back and allow them to be usurped by the judiciary or Congress. What really can be done about usurpation? Well, not a lot, but there are things we can do. First of all, we have to know it exists and know how to define it. Secondly, we need to talk about it when it occurs. And then finally, we might possibly find some politicians to elect who know what it is as well and is willing to stand up against it. So with that said, I'd like to invite Mr. Michael Levine to our broadcast. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Chuck. I hope you're having a great morning today.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good. Doing pretty good.
A lot going on in the world, Chuck.
Yeah, sure is. We live in a different world
Yeah,
than
yeah,
we,
exactly. So, that's so interesting. Go ahead, get us started.
yeah, well, when we went to bed Friday night, it was a very different place than when we were waking up here this morning.
That's true.
And uh, what's happened, obviously, and many people know that the United States went in and managed to wake Nicholas Maduro and his wife out of bed and brought them to the United States to face charges, several charges, mostly related to narcotics and narco terrorism. So I guess the first question on the floor today, Mike, is was that a good idea?
Chuck, foreign powers around the world have been strategically encroaching upon the United States for decades. And in keeping with your opening comments, our leadership in the United States has usurped its, you could say authority, but I'm going to use the word responsibility for protecting the United States against the expansion of economic interests into um, the Western Hemisphere. And I'll just refer back to the Monroe Doctrine, as President Trump does, to exemplify the concept that in order for America to be safe, we have to have a safe Western Hemisphere. So, is it a good idea? Well, the question becomes, Chuck, what are the first steps towards actually protecting America, knowing that in these modern times, wars are not necessarily fought kinetically? So hopefully you'll guide us through a little brief conversation about that over the next few minutes here, Chuck.
Yeah, well, I'll do my best. Well, so the
You
first
do a great job all
thing,
the time.
yeah, yeah. So
Good.
what's interesting is at the same time in New York, you have protests against the uh, the act of arresting, if we were willing to. that term, Maduro. And then down in Miami, you have the Venezuelans actually dancing in the streets. And much of what I'm seeing, not that I'm seeing a ton, but I'm seeing enough to know that Venezuelans around the world are ecstatic over this event. Um, the question, I guess, on the floor is I don't think it's is this a good thing for Venezuela? The real question I think people are asking is this a good thing for us? And I guess we can attack that on a couple of different footings, and one of them is certainly the Western Hemisphere and what has been happening in the Western Hemisphere with several of the major powers that are our consider our enemies. I guess we can start with China.
Again, so yes. So here's what it is, Chuck. These guys just celebrate when they put points on the board, but they're not too happy when our president of the United States, who loves winning, puts points on the board. And these are big points, Chuck. The as you know, these things I'm going to tell you right now are reported all over the place, and I'd be surprised if any of our viewers haven't heard already. But I mean, for sure, I mean, it's reported that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, number one, bigger than anyone. And then you get into the quality of the oil in Venezuela also, which they have a very heavy crude oil. So obviously, if you're extracting heavy crude out of the ground compared to light crude, you can dilute heavy crude a whole lot more than you can dilute light crude. So if a barrel of oil is a barrel of oil, but the oil in the barrel is very concentrated, you obviously get more gas and diesel out of it than a barrel of light crude. And the oil in Venezuela is heavy crude. So it's extremely valuable oil. So then you would go to the next question: who has the second largest oil reserves in the world? And the answer is Russia. Okay. So again, we'll get into the conversation of, because this is really where we're at, right? So you've got the Chinese, who have this 100-year strategy of winning wars without ever firing a shot. Therefore, they economically encroach upon the interests of the United States all over the world, Brazil, in this case, Venezuela. And then, of course, we have the Russians, who many people have said that Russia is nothing more than a big gas station. And when you start on, so for example, I guess before I get to that point, I'll just make the comment that even though Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, they're only outputting about 10% of the oil. So why is that? And of course, Russia, in conjunction with China, and of course, you have to talk about Iran when you get into this conversation, are intentionally, exerting their dominance over Venezuela, because Russia exists based on the price of a barrel of oil. So the next step becomes, in closing on this particular comment, Chuck, when Donald Trump unleashes oil production in Venezuela, then the supply of oil on the global economy will go up. And when supply goes up, and of course, there's a lot of demand for oil too. So I'm not saying there's a straight line between supply and demand, because obviously, with the data centers and things like that are heavy demand users of energy, there is a huge increase in demand for oil. But the fact of the matter is that when you greatly increase supply, then you have pressure on price. And of course, that's how Russia funds the war in Ukraine, Chuck. I'll leave it at that for a moment.
Yeah, well, let's kind of step back a little bit because I believe there are at least three separate topics that we need to grapple with. First of all, Maduro was arrested on narcotics charges, so there's the whole narco thing. And as we kind of jump right into the oil, we maybe suggesting that this wasn't about narcotics, it was about oil. And I don't know if that's true. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's true.
You think think it's true that it's about oil, not narcotics?
I think it is about using every tool in your toolbox to get rid of your adversaries out of the Western Hemisphere because we know that Donald Trump's strategy for keeping America safe is dominance in the Western Hemisphere, the re implementation of the Monroe Doctrine, and getting China and Russia and Iran and Cuba, by the way, out of Venezuela is a big piece of that puzzle. So, what again, Chuck, when you are at war with someone, you use every tool in your toolbox to win the war. And Maduro is a drug trafficker committing crimes against the United States. And it's beneficial for the United States to get this guy off the playing field. So you use every tool in your box, which would be drug crimes. And I don't think Donald Trump, I think before, I mean, if he hasn't admitted it already, it won't be long before. And again, Marco Rubio said it at the press conference on Saturday. Don't underestimate this president, right? He is going to use every tool in his toolbox to win the war. His objective is to keep America physically and economically safe and prosperous. And he played the narco terrorism card to get the communist leader of Venezuela off the playing field. Anybody have a problem with that? I don't.
Well, and obviously I don't either, but I guess the president is going to be chastised for what he's doing, and I think his enemies are going to settle in on oil as the main factor. But I do believe that the main factor is not so much oil as it is China, Russia, and Iran. And the narcotics, I think, is also a big deal. I mean, all of this, I think, what President Trump sees narcotics as the weapon du jour of our enemies to destroy us from within. And so, going after narcotics is going after the enemy. Going after Maduro is going after the enemy, and the enemy, Russia, China, Iran, we can throw Cuba in there, are worthy of going after. And I do believe that that would be a uh, far more adequate or excellent first first goal, and using narcotics and possibly running Venezuela, which I'm not sure how we're going to do that, but are certainly things that would assist him in the war we have, the undeclared war that China, Russia, and all are waging against us.
I think you just said the same thing I said. You just said it in a little different terms, right? Because you use every tool in your toolbox to get the job done. But again, it is true that, Russia is, according to the press, is crafting economic Russia. Okay. You would think China would be the one retaliating. Of course, Venezuela, right? But Russia, it's said in the press already, which is expected, that Russia is coming up with economic warfare strategies to counter what President Trump did in Venezuela, which is to be expected. But just keep in mind, we still have Ukraine going on, Chuck, and this could further draw us into Ukraine. I mean, originally, as you and I discussed over the weekend, I thought that this might be some way for the United States and Russia to kind of partner to deal with this Islamic crisis that we have in Europe. And my comment to you off camera over the weekend was that I think that Russia is more likely to extract Islam out of Europe than Europe is. And maybe Trump was open to some concessions with Russia, Vladimir Putin, and because I believe that Trump believes that the Islamification of Europe is certainly not in the best interest of the United States, and we certainly wouldn't spend our money funding NATO operations to protect an Islamic continent which would be Europe, as Islam expands their footprint in Europe. So it is quite complex as you start delving into the variables that are affected by this activity that President Trump engaged in. And I'm saying to you that under Trump's leadership, the United States has never been better positioned um, to flex its muscle in these areas, which I believe must be done if you're going to protect the sovereignty and the economic prosperity of the United States. And keep in mind, Chuck, that the value of the dollar is tied to this as well, because all of these foreign currencies like BRICS, uh, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and what's the S? I forget what the S is now. But those countries are trying to move away from the dollar because the dollar is weak. Is a weak currency, and they understand. Of course, we basically go into all of the economic activities that we have engaged in to weaken the dollar around the world, and now that goes to the flow away from the dollar into precious metals, gold and silver. We could get into that conversation on another show, but of course, that's a huge trend going on in the financial markets. Of course, the financial markets themselves are another angle on all of this. But I do believe, in short, that Trump's extracting Maduro out of Venezuela does play into a strengthening of the US dollar, Chuck, which stagnates or minimizes the impetus to move away from the dollar as the global currency. And that is, of course, a huge big deal to President Trump, Joe.
Right. Well, we could, I think, branch out into other things here, but I guess I'd like to get back to um, uh, President or whoever he calls himself, Nicholas Maduro. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think? Where is that going to go? I mean, I'm hearing stories like this trial could be going on for 2 or 3 years, and we may not see anything come of this for a long, long time. I mean, and does that matter?
I say no, it doesn't matter. As long as Maduro's not operating Venezuela, then it doesn't matter. Maduro's been extracted. And then, of course, the vice president has been at least temporarily elevated into that role. A bigger conversation would be taking out Maduro does not take out his the other officials who are involved. Actually, the word on the street is that Maduro is really not the big fish running Venezuela in the first place. So, a lot of the other Venezuelan governmental officials are still in place. And the question becomes really the more pertinent question, in my view, is do we really have control of Venezuela? And how does that all play out? That's my concern. Do we have the right leadership in Venezuela who will walk away from advancing economic and political ties to China and Russia and Iran and Cuba? Or do we still have a fight on our hands in Venezuela? That's my concern, Chuck.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of agree. I don't see how we're going to run Venezuela at any time in the near future for a lot of reasons, but I think primarily because we would need boots on the ground. I mean, do you agree with that? We would have to put Americans on the ground in Venezuela in order to actually govern it or run it in any way, shape, or form, or even uh, protect the oil companies who may possibly want to go in and work on the structure, the infrastructure. I don't know how
Well,
that happens.
just so you know, Chuck, Chevron stock price is up $6 a share. That's my last check a couple hours ago. So the markets are favorable. And the other company over there is Exxon. Exxon's up today too, not as much as Chevron, but Chevron was the big deal a year ago or so. As Maduro was kicking Chevron, leaving, of course, that's another subject, Chuck, that a few big American oil companies were robbed of their investment in oil infrastructure in Venezuela and kicked out of the country. And the government took over their oil wells and have not maintained those wells. So, as President Trump is pointing out, the oil production infrastructure in Venezuela is decrepit, and we need American, in this big transition that we're experiencing right now, we need American oil companies back in Venezuela in order to increase production, which is the triggers all the other things we've already talked about. Um, so um, let's see. Let me see if I can get back on track here. So, oh yeah, whether I'd say we should just move Marco Rubio's office to Caracas. That'd be my suggestion to Trump. Let's just put Rubio over there. You
Yeah,
know.
well, we would again, we'd have to put half
Well,
of
I guess
our
he could run it from the embassy too. I guess he could
yeah,
run it from the American embassy too. But so again, and of course, yes, it does. But Chuck, the fact of the matter is, you and me and nobody watching this video right now has any clue what's going on with the CIA and the Department of War and all that in the back scene. We don't know how much relationship building went into this before it ever happened. If anybody's celebrating the removal of Maduro, the people living in Venezuela are the most celebratory. And just so you know, Chuck, based on my real estate career around the Walt Disney World area for 30 years, I know a lot of Venezuelans. I actually have a close friend of mine who is a mayor of a large city in Venezuela who's here in the United States right now in uh, I guess technically he lives in Davenport or Polk County, right over by Walt Disney World, and he's here on asylum because they tried to kill him, and they have his sister and brother-in-law in prison in Venezuela right now. So do you think? And when Trump was running for president in 2016, my friend was talking to Mike Pence about encouraging uh, Pence directly. He was sitting at a small board table with Mike Pence, encouraging the United States to go into Venezuela then.
yeah.
That's 10 years ago, Chuck. So the Venezuelan people want these communist thugs gone, which has nothing to do with our foreign policy towards Venezuela. But I'm saying to you that yes, it's a big challenge. How do we actually take control of Venezuela and effectively achieve our goals there that have been uh, that are now irreversible by the extraction of Maduro out of Venezuela. We have that fight on our hands. We can't walk away from it now. So that is a big deal. Now your question is, how do we actually accomplish that? And I'm saying to you that you or me or nobody watching this video, unless we have Marco Rubio watching the video, which I'm pretty sure he's not, right? None
Not
of us
yet.
really have the answers to that question. So I would recommend that we all sit back and get some popcorn and watch.
Yeah, I guess. I
That's my
guess.
recommendation because it is above our pay grade.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
we have kind of brought up the idea of China and Russia being in the Western Hemisphere and President Trump not liking that at all. And the other thing that President Trump doesn't like very much is when foreign countries steal our stuff. And so what we have going on in Venezuela is both those things with the loss of the oil refineries. Or I don't know if they're refineries there, right? Just uh,
No,
the
no.
wells, etc. Yeah.
Oil production wells,
Still,
right? Mhm.
still, it was our stuff, and they took it, and President Trump doesn't like that. And it is hard to imagine how many things, how many plates President Trump has spinning, how many balls he's got juggling in the air, but he manages to do quite well. And we can possibly, as you said, sit back and relax and watch the show. Our his enemies, though, in Congress and the judiciary are probably not going to do that. What are your thoughts on moving the Maduro trial from New York to Miami in hopes to get a better jury pool?
Whatever works. That'd be my comment.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the question is it feasible? And I've heard some of the
I'm not a lawyer,
commentaries.
Chuck. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not a
Yeah.
lawyer. If people that are watching this video are interested in that, they should watch the War Room. They should watch Bannon talk about it. Bannon will have all the lawyers on. Watch the other side too, I guess. To see what they have to say about it. But I'm saying, but so I guess there's a legal answer to that question, right? Can you, where, what jurisdiction, what court would um, according to Constitution and all the things that you and I embrace, what is the proper jurisdiction in which to try this guy? So I'm going to leave that to the lawyers, Chuck.
That works. So, in our final few minutes here, you brought up the financial markets as a whole. Do you feel like this is going to affect something, the markets well beyond the oil industry?
Chuck, I'll be honest with you. Again, I want you to remember that I've been doing international. My customers in my real estate office have been international. My whole business plan for 30 years has been to list properties for sale that are owned by people who live in other countries. I've done business with, I'm sure, I counted 70 countries 20 years ago. So I know it's at least 85 countries that I personally have done real estate transactions with. Okay. And so my point is that when you go down there, Chuck, if you had a vacation, you could take, and I would say it would take a year and go down and tour Colombia, Venezuela, um, all the countries, Panama, for example, right? I mean, don't forget, Chuck, we didn't talk about Panama Canal, but that's a huge piece of this puzzle. Okay. That is a huge piece of this puzzle not to be overlooked. Okay. But I'm saying to you, when you go down there, Chuck, you're going to eat the finest fruits and vegetables. The livestock, cattle ranching, all of those resources off the charts. You and I all the time are very concerned about food supply in the United States. And I'm saying to you that when you get into that area of the world, not to mention, I mean, if you want to get into the conversation that Americans are too fat and lazy to do agricultural work, the people in Venezuela are not. Okay, and they're very willing to, herd cattle and grow mangoes and all kinds of amazing. And I'm telling you, Chuck, when you have a smoothie or vegetables and fruit and vegetables in Venezuela and Colombia and those, countries, it is amazing. Okay, so I'll be honest with you. If it was real peaceful and all that, I wouldn't mind having a little second home in one of those countries. you know, because the life in those countries can be, again, this is my big deal, and I think plays into the argument for Trump's Western Hemispheric strategy, is that these are bread baskets, Chuck. So there's no area of the economy that doesn't benefit from having a highly um, um, I want to use the word simpatico, right? Relationship with South and Central American countries, Chuck. And the upside to working with these countries is enormous. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, we are approaching our time here, so I'm going to throw it over to you for your final thoughts.
Chuck, for me personally, and I know that you and I are on the same page, but it just goes back biblically. I believe that man being in control of his own destiny is a God given blessing. And you and I talk a lot about God's plan for this world that goes far beyond your time on this planet or mine, or I would suggest anyone watching this video. So if this is, and you have to believe that God has everything in his hands and he's working towards, in my view, I say universal peace, but certainly peace on this planet and put humans in dominion over this earth towards every man governing himself, having freedom and liberty, and exemplifying the character of God on this planet. And it's really hard for me, based on my mindset, to not believe that extracting Nicholas Maduro out of Venezuela is a step in the right direction to giving the Venezuelan people and others in the world um, their God-given rights of freedom and liberty, Chuck. And I think everybody's trying to kind of get in what I'm saying about that. So I'll leave it at that. But I'm praying that this is the hand of God working in this world, Chuck.
Well, I agree with you on that. Our prayer is that God is working through this and that God still has his hand of blessings, not just on the United States, but also on our President, Donald J. Trump. So thank you, Mike, for today's broadcast. And thank all of you again for tuning in to our twice weekly live stream. Please follow us on Facebook at Restoring Our American Republic, or check us out on YouTube at Restoring Our American Republic ROAR. Please like and share the program, and remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. Until next time, God bless you, God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.